Hello everyone, welcome back to the Chess Geek channel. We are continuing our masterclass on the Caro-Kann Defense. If you don't know what this is a masterclass that is consisting of 8 full chapters that will take you through everything that you need to know to play the Caro-Kann successfully with the black pieces. So that is e4 and now c6, and from this position we look at every single thing that you need to know. If you want PGN files and you want to look at the other chapters in this course, then check the description below. That will take you to my website where you can find those things. And let's go ahead and look at the chapter that we're looking at today. And that is the advanced variation. So after d5, they push e5. We go c5. I explained in previous chapters why I like c5 instead of bishop to f5. And c3 is what we looked at in the previous chapter. This is a very passive, solid way for white to play. We tend to get very good play against this d4 pawn in these sort of structures. What I want to look at today is the more ambitious and tactical option, which is d takes c5. Now, a lot of people actually fear playing the c5 Caro-Kann and prefer bishop to f5 precisely because of the fact that white can take and then try to hold on to both of these pawns by means of f4 and by means of c3, b4 ideas. So, what is our game plan? Well, we are temporarily down a pawn, but they do have 2 clear weaknesses. And if they try to defend against this weakness on c5, we end up usually being able to take on e5. And similarly, if they play f4 and try to defend against this weakness, we can often grab this pawn on c5. And once we do, if we regain back that pawn, then we have a comfortable advantage because we now have more center. They've dragged away a center pawn in exchange for a side pawn. So if we can regain that material, positionally, we are much better. Not winning, of course, or anything, but we do have a slight initiative and a better position. Black would be better. So our approach to these positions is precisely to win back the material. So I recommend knight to c6, trying to immediately win back the pawn on e5. Now, there's 3 options that we can consider here. Again, the 2 main ideas for white are either to hold on to this pawn on e5 or to hold on to this pawn on c5. The move that is bad here, of course, is the move c3. If they immediately try to hold on to this pawn, then we can just take. So this is a non-starter. We regain material. We have the center control. They've weakened their structure for no reason. We are really happy here. The 2 serious options they have is either knight to f3, first defending this pawn, and later going c3 and then b4. This is the correct approach if they want to go ahead and defend this pawn on c5. Or they can play f4 immediately and hold on to this pawn on e5. Now, f4 is considered the best option for white objectively. And again, a lot of people don't like playing the c5 Caro-Kann precisely because we take, or white takes, and after we develop the knight, they can go f4. But there's a couple of ways to play against this. We're actually going to touch on f4 later in the video. I want to start with the more common knight to f3. So what their idea is they want to defend first this pawn on e5, but ultimately go ahead and create a nice pawn wedge on the queen side and defend the pawn on c5. What we play here is the very natural bishop to d4. They're basically handing us this move on a silver platter because now we get to play e6 very comfortably where the bishop is already developed. So in this position, we're going to look at 3 options that white has. We're going to look at bishop to e2, bishop to b5, and the immediate c3. So beginning with c3, the obvious move is to take and then take this pawn. But what I find is that we're going to lack development in this position because they go bishop b5, our knight is forced back, and here after a move like bishop e3, we regain the pawn. Yes, we have a better center and they have a slightly weakened pawn structure, but they have insane development for that. We've moved our knight many times, and the only other developed piece we've traded off. So it's very hard and awkward for us to develop in this position, and they can generate some really quick play. So what do we do instead? Well, I recommend playing the move a6 here. Not going for that greedy approach of winning the pawn immediately, but instead restricting their piece mobility, stopping this really annoying check on this diagonal, and also playing in a much more slow approach. We're ready to go e6 and simply develop. We're going to pose pressure on these pawns forever. They can never really get rid of this pressure. we don't have to cash in immediately, right? And so a6 is a very slow and steady approach to this position, and I find that this is a very nice way to go about playing. So that's our idea. Now, there's a couple of options that they have. We're going to start by looking at bishop f4, and this leads to a very nice tactical idea. We can play e6, right? Very solid. We are trying to put pressure here. b4 is basically the only idea, the only logical way to continue. And here I like the move bishop takes the knight to free the g5 square, so then we can play the move g5. What's the point? Well, we're developing our bishop to g7 with tempo. So after bishop g3, bishop g7, this pawn is well defended, and now we're putting an insane amount of pressure on this weakened pawn, right? When they took, this pawn on e5 became immensely weak, and we are capitalizing on that. So queen to e3 makes sense. We can continue knight to h6. This is a sneaky way to develop. Instead of blocking the queen's defense on g5, which plunders the pawn, we go through h6, and now we can land either on f5 or g4. Notice g4 is particularly appealing because we're also hitting the pawn. So for example, something like this, and we're very happy. So g5 is a nice way to break through if their bishop lands on f4. It's a good way to get play very quickly. Alternatively, I mean, if they play something else, you can certainly imagine they play a move like knight b to d2, just developing. Well, now we're happy to play e6, right? Maintaining our solid position. They go b4. We can eventually take. Now that these checks are no longer an issue, taking is much more appealing. And after bishop to e2, we can even just completely take and then take again, right? And in this sort of structure, we're very happy because we have the center, and at some point that center can get rolling. Additionally, we have many ways to put pressure on them. For example, a5 is a nice, quick way to add maximum pressure. And you're going to see a5 also as a very common idea. And so here, after they give the check, we go queen to d7, they trade, and after they go a3, we can simply take, and this endgame is very good for us, because although they have the two bishops, they have clear weaknesses. Our rook is very active, our pieces are going to get active, and we have the center. And something like this could develop very quickly into an attack. So b6, notice by the way they can't take, this allows this check. So b6, they develop, we can take, and go rook to a5, and it's already quite difficult, if not impossible, to defend this pawn successfully. Notice rook to c1 allows us to take on a3. So going into an endgame is very good for us. This idea of going a5 is a good one to know. It's a way to kind of break up the pawns here and weaken them, and then following that up with b6, following that up with the bishop coming out, the knight coming out, and the rook active on this a file, we can generate very quick attacks. Instead of them developing their knight, they can also go bishop e2 here, a very slow move. We continue e6, the commonality you've seen, slow and steady, trying to develop our pieces. They go b4, and here we can again play a very similar idea. Bishop takes a5, right? I told you this was a common recurring theme. Breaking up the pawns here, we're threatening, by the way, if they were to just castle, we're threatening to take, and be up a pawn, right? A very generous pawn as well, because now both of these pawns are extremely weak. And so, instead of that, again, they can push, but this allows us to take here. We can very happily take here. This pawn is weak. This pawn is also weak. We really break up and force them to overextend, which leaves them with a ton of weaknesses. And this is the benefit of playing in the way that we're playing. We are always the ones with the initiative, always the ones trying to attack and take control of the weaknesses. Here, rook to c8, for example, puts an insane amount of pressure on this pawn on c5 that is very difficult to defend. If need be, the queen can come to the attack, the knight can come to the attack. I mean, there are so many weaknesses in this position. It is a really juicy opening for us. So that is my recommended approach to these c3, b4 ideas. I want to first go a6 to restrict their quick tactical play, and later continue with a5 and really break apart these pawns. They have other options, so I want to look at bishop e2 here as well, and just quickly show you if they don't play very direct, either defending this pawn or defending this pawn, with moves like f4 and c3 and b4, if they don't play in these very committal ways, and they just develop their pieces, we can also do the same, right? We just develop our pieces, e6. We can decide to take, and here we have a nice choice of which pawn we'd like to take. Both are very good. This one's probably slightly better because we're also developing a piece at the same time. But this pawn's also weak and quite difficult to defend, and you can certainly imagine us winning this pawn over time as well, and even winning an extra pawn, being up a pawn in the end. Additionally, they can go bishop b5, for example. Here we go queen a5 check. And one of the benefits with this line, if they first throw in this move before going c3, they can't go c3 now because their knight is there. And therefore, we can very comfortably try to go about taking this pawn. So e6 here, very natural. If they were to castle, we take, and develop our pieces, and we have no issues. If they were to play bishop e3 and try to defend, we can go knight to e7. The knight is heading towards f5. And after they play a move like b4, our queen comes back, and we have added pressure both on the pawn here, and we're also, putting more pressure in the center as a whole. You can imagine the rook coming to d8, and then us even pushing d4. a6 is an idea to really question this bishop and force it to make a decision. We're the ones with play here, and we're really the aggressors in this position. And then the final option they have is an immediate a3. Their idea is to go b4 here, but notice that this doesn't work tactically. We can just take, and if they were to take, we win their rook. So look out for these tactical ideas, and generally we're very happy if they play kind of passively in the middle, not really committing towards defending this pawn and not committing towards defending this pawn. So now we have to look at what happens if they commit towards defending this pawn with f4. So we go e6 here. And our idea with e6 is the following. They're defending this pawn. We're going to go for this pawn. It's as simple as that. And I have one line here that will really show you our approach to this position. It's a very easy approach. Bishop to e3 is the only real way for them to defend this pawn. Notice they're too late now to commit with b4. We can take. So bishop to e3. But this allows us a couple of things. I do want to mention a side option you might be thinking is appealing, queen to a5. This doesn't work because now it gives us them c3 with tempo, right? We force them to play c3. So then they can get a very quick b4. And although we're getting some pawns for the piece, the engine doesn't usually like these trades. And so instead of this, I like the move d4 in this position, a very direct approach. And after the bishop drops back, I like the move bishop takes c5. We've cut the communication between the bishop and its pawn on c5, and therefore we can develop while supporting the center, and we can add a ton of pressure in this position really quickly. So the knight develops, our knight develops to e7, very natural. The knight then can also come to d5. This is an added bonus. It doesn't have to come to f5. It can also find good home in the center, where it just puts a ton of pressure. And here, after queen to d2 to defend this pawn, queen to b6, and you can already start to see that we are developing while adding pressure and just a huge attack going, right? At some point we can consider to take here and then open up this diagonal further. There's pressure on f4, there's pressure on b2, and even if they can hold on to all of that with a move like queen to c1, we've just developed all of our pieces in a very smart and strategic way. The knight can continue coming in. The only piece you might be questioning is this bishop. And maybe from the beginning, when I first played e6, you were already wondering, what about this bishop? Well, there's four real ways for this bishop to get into the game. One option is for them to help us. They go here, they take, and they allow our bishop to come out through this diagonal. The other option is that they go bishop to b5, we go bishop d7, and we trade here. And our bishop comes to light on this diagonal. Another option is we go bishop d7 anyways. And yes, the bishop is a bit passive here, but it can certainly reroute and come into the game very effectively, like what I'm showing. And a fourth and final option, which is often the most effective plan, we're going to castle. We can continue developing and playing, on this side of the board, but also f6 is an idea. And after f6, let's say takes, e5. And once e5 is played, this bishop can really shine along this diagonal. So Development should not be much of an issue. We get a very strong position with great play. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you are new around here. Like this video for more content just like this, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.